All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'm Kathleen McNamara. I'm the director of the Mortara Center for National Studies and a professor in the School of Foreign Service in the Government Department here at Georgetown. This is an event that's part of a series that we run at Mortara called the In the News series. And we're looking forward to this conversation today with our colleagues and friends and also with you in the audience. And I want to thank in particular our panel for speaking with us today about issues that they don't normally, I think, go to conferences and talk about, or on panels and talk about, which really are of a more personal nature. But, when I was preparing for today, I was a little bit a little bit wary of the notion of talking about these things I'm not normally used to talking about. So I appreciate that very much. The motivation for the panel is, of course, this question of work-life balance, which really is a hot topic today in both public and private conversations. I will state at the outset that everyone on this panel feels that regardless of how we feel about our personal situations, there's a lot of work that we need to do in the public policy realm to make things easier for all families and everyone who wants to have a personal life in the context of a work life. And those things, I think, we all feel are non-negotiable and very foundational. So these are the mantra of things that I'm sure you know. The things, unfortunately, we don't have here in the United States, things like paid parental and medical leave, universal, high-quality, low-cost child care and pre-K, extended learning time at school that would make it easier for the school calendar and the work calendar to correspond, and also a higher minimum wage and universal and affordable health care for all. Those things, I think, again, I want to state at the outset, are clearly foundational to all the issues that we're going to be talking about today. I think all of us on the panel have been able to find sort of workarounds to those sort of gaps. That we're very privileged and I think lucky that we've been able to find things like daycare and nannies and used, in my case, fellowships to have paid maternity leave, things like that. But that clearly these things should not be left to individual families to try to sort of cobble together. So today we're going to focus, though, more on the personal side of these issues, not the government policy side of the equation, although in the Q&A, happy to discuss that more fully. As I said, this is really sort of in the news moment for these issues. As I'm sure you know, the media spotlight has been focused on them, in particular for sort of two interventions that have sort of recently captured people's attention. The first one is Anne-Marie Slaughter's article from this summer in the Atlantic Monthly, Why Women Still Can't Have It All. That article is really notable for being written by a prominent academic who found herself a fantastic job as head of policy planning at the State Department while her family stayed in Princeton. And she wrote that she found it, quote, unexpectedly hard to enjoy and to revel in this pinnacle of professional success because of a combination of the workplace expectations that were so intense upon her and a sense that she needed to be at home more for her teenage boys back in New Jersey. So she argues in that piece that you really have to be, quote, superhuman to be a, quote, top professional, and that feminism has sold women a, quote, fiction that they can have all these things. And so she advocates making jobs more welcoming to work-life balance and allow the women in particular the choice to be more flexible. So I think, I'll speak for myself. There's tremendous amounts of truth in what she wrote, but I think for some of us it was quite dissatisfying because she presents a very extreme version of the story. She's living in two places, she's having this high-profile position that I think most people would find very challenging, even absent rebellious teenagers, right? The second intervention is, of course, Sheryl Sandberg's book and articles, Lean In, right? Where she focuses on the sometimes inadvertent ways that women are held back by societal and personal expectations and really exhorts women to reach for leadership roles and realize their potential. And again, I think, I actually haven't read the book, I've read, seen the talk and read the articles. I think, again, this is quite helpful to sort of remind us of these things, but also may intimidate some of us with the notion that we should all be leaning in all the time, right? That this is somehow what we need to do in order to find this elusive work-life balance. So I think, for me, these accounts are useful, but they certainly don't tell the whole story. And so I thought it'd be very interesting to ask couples that I was familiar with who I think have demonstrated that it's possible to have a full life that does encompass both work and personal life, meaningful work, right, that pays the bills, and a fulfilling personal life, which for many of us does mean having children, right? That's not the only way you would have a meaningful personal life, but for those of us on the panel, I think that's certainly been central. But achieving this work-life balance certainly may involve compromises and unforeseen turns in the road. And when I got everyone's resumes, CVs, and was looking them over, this becomes actually crystal clear that there are a lot of very interesting moments when each of your careers has sort of suddenly swerved into, taking a fellowship in Germany in the middle of your medical training suddenly because your partner is doing fellowship work in Germany for his PhD, moving to Washington because your partner has a job in Washington, leaving behind an academic job, and so on. And so I wanted us to have a moment to sort of talk through this and to maybe set aside the sort of dread and anxiety that often comes with thinking through these issues and seems to pervade the conversation in the media, and to give the panel a chance to advocate instead optimism and activism, right, to create this meaningful life and this rich professional and personal life. Measured however each person may measure it, right? So now I'm going to stop talking for a little while and let our couples have some time to give us their advice and observations, which is really sort of how I pitched it to them. How would you kind of advise others who are struggling with these issues? So we're going to start with Abe Newman and Craig Pollack, who are over to my right. I'm going to give a very, very brief bio, and then hopefully some of the sort of interesting personal path will emerge. Abe has a PhD from University of California at Berkeley in political science. He did have a very prestigious fellowship at Max Planck Institute in Germany as he was working on his PhD. And he came to Georgetown as assistant professor and then became a tenured associate professor here. Craig has, annoyingly, 2 masters, from what I can gather, as well as an MD from Berkeley. As I mentioned, he was a visiting researcher in Germany. He was at the San Francisco General Hospital where he did his training, then a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow at UPenn for a bit, then at Rand here in DC, and now has settled at Johns Hopkins, where he's a professor in the Department of Medicine. And you actually have 9 positions listed on your CV. So there's a lot of work-life balancing going on there. First of all, can I ask you guys how you met? How did you guys meet?
Yeah, so we met, there's the metro in San Francisco is called BART, and we were both entering the metro at the same time, commuting, coming back from Berkeley. We were both living in San Francisco at the time, and there was a construction delay, and I could tell that Craig did not understand how this was going to happen, and I saw my window, and I struck. And the rest is history.
Great. And so you've actually, I think, been together for 14 years, is that right? And ish? Yeah?
1999,
yeah.
October 99.
Okay, 13. And so 14, and you've been married since 2006, and they have a 2-year-old daughter. So why don't you guys speak to us a little bit about how you think about this work-life balance stuff?
So I think one theme that we wanted to talk a little bit about was the idea of negotiation. So there have been places in our sort of history where there's been large negotiations. So, when Abe decided to take a job here at Georgetown when I was still doing my training in San Francisco, or when Abe needed to go abroad for his fellowship, and deciding whether to come, or when Abe. I think those are some of the main ones. But so, Kate, did you want to bring those up again, or?
Well, the job market in the academy is structurally very rigid. So
So, I think there are those large points of negotiation, and those I think are some of the main times that you really think like, oh, that's negotiation, that's the compromise that couples make. But I think for us, there's negotiation on a daily level, and that's negotiation that happens of whose turn it is to get up in the middle of the night when Micah is still waking up, unfortunately. Our daughter is still waking up. And these moments of negotiation that I think are happening all the time, we often joke about what's written in our marriage license, because we have a marriage license that's written in Hebrew, and we'll often joke of, I'm pretty sure it says, Abe, that it's your turn to get up. It's written in our marriage license. And I think, being open and honest about those negotiations and continually being able to reassess what was decided before, depending on sort of the changing circumstance, has been really pivotal in our balancing work and life obligations.
And were there ever any moments when you really sort of saw yourself as having to make a super hard decision, and how did you kind of work through that? Like, what was the hardest decision maybe out of those different decision points for you, and how did you work through it?
So I think, going back to the job market search for Abe, I think, one way we try to deal with that was to make decisions early in the process. So there were places where he was looking that it was going to be clear that there wasn't going to be good opportunities for me. And so rather than sort of go down the pathway and sort of, well, we'll see what happens and make a decision later, I think it was important for us to recognize early on that we were in it together and to make those decisions early so that we didn't get to a place where we felt like we were stuck later on.
Yeah, I remember when we were recruiting Abe to come here, we were thrilled that his partner would prefer to be in a big city. This was awesome for us, right? But obviously that is, something that you had immediately in your calculations, and we're really trying to plan ahead and be realistic about that and how that would work. Okay. Abe, do you have anything else you wanted to?
Well, I just wanted to emphasize this idea that I feel like the interventions that have been made, the lean in or the you can't have it all, they're very focused on the individual. And at least for me, the whole work-life balance thing is the couple, and it's also in constantly being revised. So it's the problem. I think the work-life balance becomes the most difficult when you settle into routines and then you get uncomfortable with those routines. You're not happy with how those routines are working. And so it's really a successful work-life balance, in my view, is that you're constantly revisiting those, how you're dealing with your work-life balance. And if you don't, I think if you just kind of be like, well, I'm leaning in, or I'm, those kinds of things, it's going to be very difficult to maintain that strategy over the long term. And so even though it sounds, it's very time consuming because you're constantly revisiting and you're kind of like, oh, who's going to get up tonight and who's going to cook dinner and what's going on with the laundry. But the more I think that you just kind of establish very set habits, those things then often rub people the wrong way over time. So it's just, I think in my mind, it's been a successful process to say, let's just keep talking about it and we change things, and it's not just one thing over the long term.
And you're the ones that have had your child most recently. What was the biggest impact that having a child had on this sort of already fairly complicated negotiation and kind of flow that you had established between you two? What was the hardest thing? Was it getting up at night? It sounds like that was bad.
No, I just think, I think it really just, and this is where I would agree with the articles, is that it creates this totally radical new prioritization of what your life is about. So, before I would say that for both of us, work was like equally there with our relationship as like a priority in our lives, and now it's like the child comes before both of those things, and so that's, that just changes how you're willing to negotiate your work-life balance.
Right. Good. Okay. Great. All right. Maybe we'll turn to Jeff and Celeste. Jeff Anderson is a professor here in the BMW Center for German and European Studies. Jeff got his PhD at Yale. He started out his career at Emory University in Atlanta for a couple years, and then moved over to Brown University, where he was for quite a while, about 12 years, and then came to Georgetown first as a visiting professor, and then went over to a nonprofit think tank, the American Institute for Contemporary German Studies, for a year before coming back to to Georgetown, and where he's been ever since. Celeste also got her PhD from Yale, so I bet we know where they met. She started her career at Harvard as a professor in the government department, and then came down to be at the Council on Foreign Relations here in Washington, moved over to the Center for Strategic International Studies, where she was for a good 5 years or so, had a brief stint as a visiting professor while she was also advising the Obama campaign, and then moved over to become Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, Eurasia at the Department of Defense, where she was for basically the first term, Obama's first term. And now she's at American University as an associate professor and director of the MA program there in international politics. So you guys have been together for how many years then?
Well, we met in 1983.
I was letting him
You see if I
answer
get that
as a
right.
test. And the date of our first date was
October 31st.
28th.
Well, that's-
28th. October 28th.
It was a Halloween party. Though.
October 28th.
I was dressed as a mouse. So. I'm not going to say it.
And they have 3 kids who are 22, 18, and 15, believe it or not. And you guys did meet at Yale, is that
Yes,
right?
we did. Absolutely.
And so why don't you now speak to some of these issues and how you approach it. And Celeste is particularly interesting because I think of all of us, potentially, I don't know, Craig also in the medical field may have one of these high-stress jobs, but you certainly had a very time-sensitive job that's similar in certain ways to what Anne Marie Slaughter was writing about. So.
You
I'll go first, yeah. I thought I'd talk a little bit about some things that pick up on Abe's remarks. Those of you who know me well will not be surprised that I'm going to use a sports metaphor to describe the advice I'm going to give you. This whole thing of work-life balance, on reflection, reminded me a lot of what it must be like to play for a very competitive sports team. In other words, not some rec team that gets together once in a while, but a team where the stakes are high, where the rewards are potentially huge, but where there are real costs to failure, and there's a real potential for tensions. And it has to do with the way that, good teams, anyone who knows anything about competitive sports knows that good teams rely on not just individual achievement, but also a willingness to sacrifice for the common good, for the team good. You may be playing a position that, based on the opponent, requires you to not go forward, to play more defense. You can think of a variety of permutations. And it struck me that, looking back over our lives, our marriage together, and what we've encountered, we've each done that almost unconsciously. That is, there's been negotiation, but not a lot of it. The decision to do the right thing for the team was obvious at the time. And I can count at least 5 or 6 instances, starting with Celeste's decision to, when I received my first job offer from Emory, Celeste was in the middle of a very prestigious MacArthur SSRC grant that had us out in the Bay Area at Berkeley, and she was going to be finishing up a second year of additional training in a related field. Celeste, just without any issue at all, without any discussion, yes, of course, we're going to Atlanta. Being at the Carter Center in Atlanta was fine, but it was a long step away from Berkeley and Stanford and the concentration of expertise that's there in her field. Similarly, my decision to take a semester's leave of absence without pay from Emory and travel up to Boston to affiliate myself as a visiting scholar with the Mineta Gunsberg Center, while Celeste pursued, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity at Harvard. That was just a no-brainer for me. In some ways, it was luck the way things worked out. We were certainly prepared to have to move back to Atlanta, but good fortune shined on us, and I was able to get a job at Brown. So there's also a theme about being willing to take risks that maybe we can come back to later on. And there are other more recent instances that I'd be happy to go into, but I think you get the point. The flip side of this, though, is the individual. I think good work-life balance and a good family balance requires inner balance as well. And I guess my advice to you would be to don't set aside your individual passions as you pursue your career, as you take care of your family, as you invest with love in your spouse. For me, it's soccer, it's other things. For Celeste, it's running. We spend a good amount of time on ourselves, fulfilling ourselves as well, and I think that allows us to come to the partnership feeling whole, and that's vital.
Celeste has run 33 marathons.
So actually, I was going to use that because Jeff plays team sports, and you might think of marathons as very individual, and they are in a way, but they're also, I can make an analogy too, because runners run different races for different reasons. Sometimes you run because you want to run really fast, and you want to have that fastest time ever. But sometimes you run because a friend wants to finish a marathon, so you decide you're going to run with her and help her finish. Sometimes you run just for the joy of running. I've run the Disney Marathon 8 times, and one year I decided to bring a camera with and stop at every single. I have pictures with Mickey and Minnie and Dumbo and everybody. So that comes to what I want to say about work-life balance, which is, of course you can't have it all. Life is about making choices. And as a feminist, for me, what the real issue for women in particular, but I'm going to come to this for men too, is having choices. Living in a society with a well-run government that provides the right structure to be able to make reasonable choices.
Absolutely.
But thinking that you don't have to pay the price for choices you make is the wrong path, and is not a path towards happiness and being accountable for and taking ownership of your life and the things you care about. So we could have, in our relationship, resented the fact that we couldn't have it all. Jeff gave up a tenure-track job at Emory, it looked like. It worked out for him at Brown. And then when I left Harvard, he risked a tenure job at Brown that he loved because we had to find a different path. So everyone makes choices. And for me, the big development for women, professional women in particular, but women in general, is that we are starting to be able to make the same kinds of choices that men have been able to make. So that being a professional woman isn't about necessarily having it easy, but it's about being able to make tough choices and for others to respect the choices we make. Whether that is taking time off and staying home with new children, whether that is asking your husband to take time off and stay home with new children, whether that is staying late in the evening to go to some dinner with some important person, or saying, no, I'd really rather go home and have dinner with my family and help my kids with their homework. And then but it's not just about women having that, because the truth is that 30 years ago, men didn't have it all either. They couldn't make choices to stay home with their kids if they chose to. Or like Jeff, to say to his staff, who I know are very tolerant at the BMW Center, I can't be at that meeting because I have to go coach soccer. So I think the direction our society is going in correctly is to recognize families make these choices, individuals within the families make the choices, and to respect those choices, and to try and make them tolerable and reasonable. But it is a pipe dream to believe that you're never going to have to make tough choices. So what one should be investing in is one's education, so that you have the opportunity to make choices, good, solid relationships with people you care about, your spouse, but your family, your friends, your community. So sometimes when I've needed to train for running, my friends have helped support me. Sometimes it's been my family. So investing in relationships and in people, and that creates the right environment to be able to achieve your individual objectives, to provide, if you have a family, to provide for your family, to be a happy person to your family, because an unhappy parent is not a gift to children. So you have to be happy about your choices in order to be able to find this work-life balance, and to have credibility with your colleagues. And leadership does matter. For example, I know you have great leadership here at Georgetown. My new dean at American University is Jim Goldgeier, who I've known since I was at Berkeley. I met him at Berkeley. And Jim, having leadership of someone who himself is a father of 2 children, who has made these kinds of choices, who left a tenure-track job at Cornell because his wife's career as a journalist would be better supported in Washington, just creates an environment in which that is a welcome and possible opportunity. So I think that, again, my advice when students come talk to me about these issues is to begin to practice. When you're a student, you make choices about the classes you take, you make choices about what kind of professional school you want to go to, and that's good practice, because those choices aren't going to go away, and you have to learn how to find the right ones for yourself early on.
Great, thank you. And I think, listening to what Celeste says, I think it's very wise. And when I think about the couples that I've met in Washington, I have many, many examples of friends who have been able to be flexible, think in turn, take one for the team, but really, make what seem to be quite hard choices, but to continue to sort of keep investing in themselves and in their work and their families, such that down the line, other opportunities open up for them. And they've been really successful. We have around the corner from us, we have a couple who, when we first moved here, was such a Washington thing. We're at the bus stop, waiting for the kindergarten bus or whatever, and we meet first of all, everyone at the bus stop has a law degree except Tomas and I. We feel like totally out of it. But this one couple, it turns out they met because they were Rhodes Scholars, right? And they both have law degrees. And he had clerked for a Supreme Court justice, and she had worked, in the I guess the Clinton interior, I guess, on climate change, this and that and the other thing. But watching them over the years, they have definitely sort of done this amazing kind of dance back and forth. Abe and I were talking about this earlier, and it's sort of like, it seems very awkward and it's difficult and there's all this negotiation, but for sure, I think we're at a moment in time where we see both sides of the partnership, men and women, making things work. And so, I think it's really important to heed this sorts of advice. I think it's very helpful. Anything particularly on sort of life in a bureaucracy at DoD with things happening where it really matters whether you're at your desk or not and so on?
Yeah, I mean, we talked, before I accepted the position, we talked about that because we knew, well, we thought we knew. We knew that it was going to mean that Jeff was going to do all the laundry, which he did, all the shop. We started using Peapod, an online food delivery service. It was the right time in our life because we had one in college, one in high school who was learning to drive, could more take care of himself, and our daughter was still in middle school, but it was, I often said at the Pentagon, I don't know how people do this job with babies. I mean, I think that's hard. So it was the right time in our life. And there's no question that Jeff did, for 3 years, he did everything. I left the house at 7 in the morning, and I did the bills, like at 9 at night. That was it, online. But I left, every day I left at 7 in the morning, and I never got home before 7:30, and I probably traveled half the time. And there are TSA guards at Dulles who can know me by name. But it was a time period in which we agreed it was important. I wanted to do it. We could do it. I couldn't have done it if Jeff hadn't stepped up and taken that responsibility. But again, I think I felt that we went into that knowing we were going to make a sacrifice and choosing to make that sacrifice. To have done anything else, then maybe we would have been embittered. Maybe we would have been angry at one another. Maybe I would have, not been able then to be ready when it was time to leave to understand that I needed to step back now and be with the family more. So I do think there may be times in your life when it's the right thing to do to take that job that requires you to not be home. But you just have to recognize that you're going to pay a price for that, and is the benefit of that worth it?
Yeah, great, excellent. Okay. Thank you, guys. And finally, Tomas Montgomery and myself. Tomas and I met, where did we meet, darling?
At the library at Columbia during grad school.
Yeah, I thought it was Dean's Tea, actually.
Well,
so,
actually, it was in the bubble courtyard, but that's okay.
Oh, that's right. So we did meet in graduate school. I don't know if you guys have heard this. The Daily Princetonian published this outrageous letter. There's some nods here and there, where a Princeton graduate from sort of our era wrote a letter to the Daily Princetonian exhorting the young women on campus to make sure to get their MRS as they leave the campus, because there would never be as many sort of, intelligent, likely, presumably good income-producing men in their lives ever again. But as you can see, apparently there are other opportunities to meet people.
It's a ridiculous statement, but I'm kind of guilty of that, because I went to Columbia and got my MR, so now it's Dr. and Mr. So.
That's true. So we met at Columbia. We were both doing graduate work there. Tomas left Columbia and worked in a sort of small sportswear company and got a COO kind of experience doing that. We both moved to Brussels after we got married, after we got married, I had a Fulbright to Brussels when I was finishing my PhD at Columbia. And Tomas had the Beer and Waffles Fellowship in Brussels, but finagled himself somehow at the think tank we were at. You became, what was your official, you were like a consultant?
Consulting or marketing.
Consulting, IT. There was this thing called the internet, which was just beginning, that they didn't really know about, so he got them all set up on that. My first job was at Princeton University, and so Tomas actually started working in a very small online retail startup, which again was one of the first sort of internet companies, retail companies, which ended up being very time consuming. And I realized I'd sort of blacked that out of my head. There was a point when actually I was an assistant professor and we had 2 little kids and you were working like 90 hours a week. So that was really rough, right? So we definitely had our period of a couple years. We moved down here to DC, and Tomas has also worked at Merrill Lynch and Aventis, and now he's at Lockheed Martin as a project manager. Did I get everything in there? Okay, good. So we've been together for about 25 years, married for almost 20, and we have 2 teenage boys. So I'm going to let you start with your thoughts.
So nothing, well, a little bit different or similar to echoing what these people have said before, but one of the things for me is what driving factors is you prioritize a family, right? We're together, we're, 2 halves are bigger than one whole, right? So together you're a team and you do things, whatever is needed for the team. And for me, sometimes, we don't think about these things so much. It says, you want to go to Brussels? I'm like, okay, and sound like I can eat some beer and have some waffles. It can't be that bad, right? I discovered at that time that I was worth $1,000 because Kate had a Fulbright and your stipend was $9,000. It's like, well, if you're a spouse, do you get extra more? And they go, yeah, you get $10,000. So it was worth $1,000, but at least it's something, right? I brought something. Yes. So anyway, so 2 halves are more than 1 half, even though it might be $1,000 more. But so we're you're a partnership, right? You're 2 people. So if your partner succeeds, you also succeed, right? It's not just only one-sided because you're together as one. Now, when you're thinking about, at some of those times you have to make sacrifices on your career, your job, and we get so hung up sometimes on the particular job and not on the career and what your passion is, right? You should be doing what is passionate to you, and it kind of creates a career, and part of that is a job, and jobs can come and go. You can always find another job. It's a lot harder to find another spouse as good as this one, right? So. That's how I would think about it. And I believe in having a balanced partnership, right? If some people might like to have the 1950s relationship where the man makes all the money and the woman stays home, that's just not something not for me, because I think not for Kate either, but it would kind of drive you crazy. So other things that we when we were younger and before we had kids, we. Not necessarily consciously, but we took advantage of the time that, we could stay to work to 7 or 8 at night, and it wouldn't matter because then you work 7 o'clock at night and you go out to dinner, right? And then you go home and you sleep and you do the same thing again because the pressures are not that. And I think a lot of this kind of pressures come in later on when you have kids, and because when you have kids, your life is totally turned around. You forget you ever had a schedule because you don't know what that is after that. And it takes some years to figure out what the schedule is, and you have to figure out what the balance is and how you manage, waking up in the middle of the night and taking care of the children, right? So early on, we just came up with there's some simple rules that we come up with. It's like, okay, I cook, you clean, right? Simple. No arguing about it. Yeah, it doesn't mean like every night you do it, but if you're away for whatever, you try to, you might have to do cooking and cleaning, right? But eventually you come to the balance. And there's those simple things that sometimes I find, make the bigger decisions easier to manage, because you don't have this kind of built up, like, I've been making dinner and cooking every single time for the last, few months, and why did I have to do it or you have, right? The other thing is like, I take the kids to the orthodontist, you take them to the annual checkup, right? Or, you swap around. These kind of ideas that you want to do. And when you think about the time you spent, at work or at home doing whatever it is, your schedule should be balanced enough so that if you were to swap schedules with your spouse, you would feel perfectly fine. It wouldn't make a difference if all of a sudden, you're spending as much time as she is doing the work and she's doing the same as you, because it should be balanced, and it is balanced, I think. Of course, there are times when I have to work 90 hours a week for months at a time. Particularly when you have an online department store and Christmas comes around. I mean, there's like no holidays between Thanksgiving and
January 2nd.
Well, no, actually, Valentine's Day, because it's just it's a one time a year where you have to work crazy hours. Now, trying to skip Christmas and it's not a good thing, right? But eventually, you get over that, and we moved away from that because I understood that was not going to be a long-term, successful, way of living my life. The other thing I think about it is before we got married, I was thinking about this. I had this sportswear company, and I wanted to be a partner. And it's like, we can be a partner with this guy, make a lot of money. But it's like, on the other hand, there's this Kate girl, and it's like, I like her. And in the long term, you think, well, what is going to be more important? Who's going to be there, later in your life? Is it going to be your partner, your boss, or is it going to be your spouse, right? And so the simple way of thinking about this is like, if you break your leg, right, who's going to come help you? Is it your boss or your spouse, right? So for me, it was like, okay, well, it's easy enough. I don't need that partner. Right? Just get married. So that's how I think about things.
Great. And actually, I broke my ankle severely last year, and apparently, Tomas told me later that a friend of mine called him to tell him this, and he was still on the cell phone getting the information from her as he was walking onto the elevator to come into the hospital. So, yes, you did.
It was I was on the phone, and he said, like, I broke it, and it was at my desk. And he said my leg, I was in the elevator,
So let me just finish up, and so we can kind of open things up to more of a conversation. I think these are all really helpful and interesting things for us to think about. And what I prepared to say, I think somewhat maybe summarizes a little bit. One thing is to be stubborn about the ends, but not the means. Right? Be stubborn about the ends, but not the means. There are lots of different ways to get to this, passionate, meaningful work life that you want to have, and to share in this family life that you want. So when I was doing my master's at SIPA at Columbia, I took the Foreign Service exam, and somehow I passed eventually and got an appointment. But I was also applying to PhD programs, and it was very clear to me that life going through the PhD program would be really, really hard, but I could conceive of a family life that involved Tomas, who I had already met, much more easily than I could see of being a Foreign Service officer, which I'd grown up as a Foreign Service brat, so I knew exactly what was involved. And I would have loved being Foreign Service officer, but I figured, I'm going to love being an academic, and I'm going to go do that. And it's turned out fine, right? At Princeton, when I was an untenured faculty member, I was actually the first female assistant professor in the politics department, which is a huge department, like 50 people, and had been around for 100 years. I was the first assistant female professor to have children. And so people literally said to me things like, well, you're very brave, aren't you? And I was like, I'm 33. It's really just kind of like time for it to happen. And, I suppose I could have written a couple more books, in the time that I spent having 2 kids on my 6 or 7 year tenure track, job position. But again, it was about making choices, and it was very clear to me that this was a great choice that I was making, right? And that, nobody gets tenure at Princeton, so that made it easier for me. I knew that, but I knew that if I did what I had to do and worked really hard, I could get a job at a good school, and have a couple kids. And I remember having 3 kids when I first met you. I thought, wow, that is impressive, right? So be stubborn about the ends, but not the means, and go for it. Okay, this will be a little controversial. Guilt is for sissies. All right, guilt is for sissies. And I don't really mean that. I mean, if you're racked with guilt, you probably need to change the means, right? There's probably something wrong in your life, and that you need to tweak, and you need to figure out that the balance is out of whack and you're doing something wrong. But I definitely have met a lot of friends, and basically, I have to say all women over my life, who are sort of, constantly racked with guilt about, putting their kid in daycare or not being there for this or that and the other thing. And I actually think, children actually thrive on benign neglect to some degree, right? If anything, in the world we live in, the helicopter parenting is a much bigger problem than the opposite. and that, you kind of have to say boo-hoo, grow up, and move on, right? And, so pay attention to what's the worthwhile guilt. Feeling guilty because you didn't do that, home-baked muffins for the kindergarten, whatever, I just don't think that's very productive, right? I actually really do like to bake, by the way, so that's separate. And then finally, pick the right partner. Clearly, this is also really important, that none of this is achievable unless you have somebody who is going to think about it in terms of being a team and being a unit and being together. So with that, I'll stop, and thank you very much all for sharing your ideas. And open it up to questions and comments and advice, because I know there are people in the room who have balanced a lot of stuff, and I'll start with Robert, who is a great example of this.
Hi, I'm Robert Egnell, a visiting professor in the Security Studies program. But I'm really here as an accompanying spouse because my wife is in the Swedish Foreign Service, works at the Swedish Embassy down on the waterfront. We've got 3 kids, 3 boys, really wild, 3, 5, and 7 years old. So the idea of a balance is sort of, I don't even understand the word.
Yeah.
Anyway, the advice, I thought about this quite hard, if I even have any kind of advice to give, but the one that comes to mind is completely against what every career coach says, which is sort of set a clear aim and then work really hard to get it.
Right.
And I think if you have a clear aim, which is sort of a preconceived idea about where you want to go and how you're going to get there, you're just setting yourself up for some serious failure and constant misery. I think you need to be open about life and where to go, especially if you have a partner or kids. Nothing's ever going to turn out exactly the way you thought it would. We had our sort of pivotal moment, I guess, when my wife was posted for the first time to Tanzania. And I was writing my PhD in London, and we thought, this is tricky. How do we work this out? But I tagged along, and I wrote from Tanzania, and I played a lot of tennis. And it sort of worked out in the end anyway. And I've tagged along to DC, and it also works out. But I'm never, ever going to have the typical tenure career of an academic, right? But that's also, I don't know where I'm going in life, but it works out every time. And I think it's because I don't have a very clear aim. I don't have a clear idea of where I'm heading or why even.
Right.
So I think be careful about those preconceived ideas about what life is supposed to be about.
Right.
How you define all is sort of, if you can't have it all, it's probably because you haven't defined all in a very bad way.
Yeah, I think that's right. We need a new way of we need a new buzz phrase, right? Because having it all is kind of ridiculous, but you can, so I'll think about that. Okay, but thank you.
Have the best, I guess.
Any responses, or I think probably just agreement, right? Yeah,
Absolutely.
a lot of agreement. Okay, either Sarah or, he has it all.
Thank you so much. I like your presentation very much. My name is Cynthia from BPE, Georgetown University. And it is said that we should have this wisdom to know, do the right thing at the right time. Maybe we should get married at a certain age. We should have a baby at a certain age, both from the social pressure or from families' hope. So I really have this conflict. I really want to pay more attention to my job, career, but my parents and parents-in-law really want me to have a baby right now. Could you give me some tips to do this?
Oh, that's an easy one, right? So I'm going to take a real quick stab at it and then sort of hear what other people have to say. So I have observed that the women who seem to be very happy in my life have as I think Celeste put it, invested heavily in their careers at some point, right? So that they really have something to bring to the table when they then want to negotiate, or when they then need to sort of put themselves in a position where they can sort of write their own schedule, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a delicate balance. I think that there, it does just physically, obviously, become harder to have a child the longer you wait. But I think that it is a good idea to really focus heavily on sort of investing in yourself and the human capital and what you need to kind of feel like you're at least launched on some path. It might not, as Robert puts it, it's not necessarily a kind of, preordained path. But I think it is wise to kind of wait a little while until you're comfortable. But What do other folks
So,
think?
yeah, I would. So I don't know your family, but it seems to me that possibly what it is that they have a vision of how you'll be happy, and their vision is just a little bit off. Though it's not your vision of how you'll be happy, and so framing it as, but this is how I will be happy. Don't you want me to be happy? Might help to. And I want to have, if you do want to have children, but my mother wasn't pressing so much, but Jeff's mother would sort of start saying when we were in graduate school. And it was like, we need to have jobs first and have jobs. You know, it wasn't that we didn't want that, but we want to say this is right for us so that we can be happy. Don't you want us to be happy, Mom? Yes. What's she going to say? No, I want you to be miserable. So I think that comes through changing society. I do want to pick up just quickly, I don't want to talk too much, but on something that Kate, because it reminded me. Even though we're saying you should take control, you should have ownership, you know, we do have to recognize that there are still lots of obstacles out there and lots of bad thinking. I don't mean your parents. I mean, when I was a junior professor at Harvard, so I was pregnant 3 times, my dear colleague and friend, who is Louise Richardson, who's now she's the rector of St. Andrews, right? So she was like 6 months ahead of me each time. We were pregnant about the same time. And I went to a faculty meeting once, one of my senior colleagues went, "Oh, Louise, how you doing?" Because I was pregnant. I thought, oh, so Louise and I were the pregnant junior faculty women. So there was that to deal with. And
So
then
they used to call me like Sherry Berman or Catherine Stoner Wise.
Yes, they
Because
would
there were
make-
like 3 of us who were all like pregnant within so we were interchangeable.
So that's a funny one. The other one, though, is I think that women have a special role. Women and men in leadership positions who've experienced this as well have a role to make sure that that atmosphere is welcoming of families and having toddlers at university events and not having that separation, that false separation between you as a person and you as an employee, as a professor, as a lawyer, as whatever you're going to be. And one of my senior colleagues, when I was up for tenure, told the staff at the center I was at, I had just become pregnant with my 3rd child, and my book just came out with Cornell University Press, which you'd think would have gotten me something, said that he was concerned because this proved I wasn't serious.
Of course.
Being pregnant a 3rd time.
Yeah.
And I think it's better, but with all the positive message that we've given today, I do think I also want to say that everyone has an obligation to help one another in pushing back against that kind of thinking and that kind of tone. And I think having people of our generation who have this different approach helps, but we have a duty now to give back to create the right atmosphere so that younger women, younger men, younger couples who are making these choices feel comfortable in making those choices.
And do it at the time that's right for you. Yeah.
Can I
Yeah, sure.
interject for a second? Because I do think that when you have a family, it's a very, very personal decision that takes a ton of different factors. But I do think Abe and I are a little bit older when we had our first child, and a lot of our friends have been going through the process of having their children around the same age, and honestly running into a lot of trouble. And I think that's not always talked about, right? Because people don't always talk about their fertility issues. I think for Abe and I, it was clear that we were,
We're going to need help.
So we're a little more open about it. But I think it's something that is, it can be really challenging, and a lot of the families that we know, maybe had 1 child and want to have another, or and have just not been able to, or had to go through a lot of different methods to do it. And so I think the timing needs to think through that. And I'm not sure as a society that we've been as open as we need to be about these very personal matters.
And I would just chime in and say it's really important whenever you're going to have a child, what your partner and I think this was something that Celeste mentioned of like your network, how they are going to buttress your goals. If your goal is to be in a high-powered job and they want you to have a kid, well, that's okay as long as they understand their role to play in that, in getting everybody to where they want to be. And so it's not, I think that the difficulty is a lot of times people have ambitions, then they have the child, and then this is the lean in, critique, is that then it's not just the individual, but the whole social network then gives up on the ambition part and just focuses on the child. So I think it's just important that everybody is on the same page of kind of how can people help that everybody gets to kind of follow their ambitions.
I think David maybe over here, David Elstein.
So, David Edelstein, I'm on the faculty here and chair of the School of Foreign Service faculty at the moment, and my wife's a doctor, so we face some of these challenges. And 2 questions for you, and I apologize if I have to hit and run to go to a meeting. But the first one is outsourcing. You know, one of the things that 2-income families sometimes afford you is the opportunity to have the resources to at least outsource some of the parenting side of it. Are there things that you have resisted outsourcing? Mm-hmm. Are there things that you have outsourced that you regret outsourcing? And how have you sort of approached that? And then the second one, I think probably more for Kate and Tomas and Jeff and Celeste, who are a bit more advanced in their parenting, sort of, you know, have more years of parenting under their belt. Could you please tell me it gets easier rather than harder?
Outsourcing, you guys seem to have.
Well, I'm going to answer David's second question first. And picking up on the metaphor that Craig and Abe used, which is negotiation. As they get older, they want to participate in the negotiations as well. So you have to be willing to expand the table. And especially with our lovely teenage daughter, who I adore, I sometimes feel on a given day like it's North Korea showing up at the table. I mean, you just, and you have to be willing to talk. I mean, they become autonomous individuals at some age.
She's going to kill you. If anyone puts this on Facebook, Jenny, I don't agree. No.
Finland.
Your other question, outsourcing. We hired a nanny for 2 years, was it?
And we had daycare, part-time up to full-time.
But I have to say the 2 years that we had a nanny, I was not comfortable at all. And it wasn't because they weren't great people. I mean, they were. We had 2. One was called up for duty or service after 9/11, and so we lost her. Hired Stacy, and she was great. But during that whole time, I just felt, you know, kind of disconnected from things. And one of the lovely things about having a job in academia is that we do have the flexibility to handle these things. So, and this was the year that I was at the think tank, and Celeste was at a think tank. This was the first time I'd ever worked a 9-to-5 job. I hated it. You know, the idea that I had to be there at 9, I couldn't leave until 5. I mean, it just was not, you know, not consistent with my experience or what I wanted out of life. So as soon as I landed the Georgetown job, we used the opportunity to ask Stacy to kind of move on and went back to a demanding, but for me anyway, a much more comfortable pattern, which is that we just shared and alternated and used the flexibility in our schedules. And I realized that option is not available to everyone. So you know, you have to get comfortable with the outsourcing if that's your only option.
Anybody else on outsourcing?
I would just, something I was going to originally say, which is the other thing is that the choice for every family and every individual is different, and the different balance. And for some families, nannies work. For some families, family members work. You know, there is a grandmother or a grandfather, or, you know, parts of families that. So there isn't I think, again, it comes back to my point is we respect one another's choices. If for someone, you know, having a nanny and they can afford it, works for them, then we should support that, and society should support that. If daycare and government support for daycare and availability of safe daycare works for a lot of families, and there should be a way to make that happen. And, you know, for some people, when our first was born, we arranged our teaching so that we taught on, none of our 3 kids went into daycare until they were over a year old, because for the first year we were able to juggle our teaching schedules so that someone was always home. And in the first year they sleep, so you can work on writing your book while they're sleeping. They learn to write in 2-hour chunks. It was like, the nursery monitor started burbling, and you go, oh God, finish this paragraph. And, you know, that wasn't a long-term solution, but it worked. So I do think that all of those options should be available, because the same thing is not going to work for every individual and at every given point in your life as well.
Okay. Some comments over here, maybe, and in the back as well.
Thank you very much. This is a great presentation. My name is Peggy, and I'm an attorney, and I have also taught here in the School of Continuing Studies. And I love being an attorney. I went in the Peace Corps after 12 years of that. That's not usually how people do it. I did read Lean In. A lot of people haven't read it, but did this suddenly go off? Okay. I read a lot of the literature about it too, which, by the way, she has a co-author, and nobody ever
right.
bothered to mention that. She says she didn't answer questions about childcare and other things in her house because she said you wouldn't ask a man that. Mm-hmm. You just asked 3 men that, right? Mm-hmm. So I think I ask men this all the time. I adopted a daughter. I have a husband, but he's no longer with us. But I adopted a daughter as an adult, and I have a teenage grandson. And my theory is that teenagers need you more than ever. And maybe that's what you're saying about you got to involve them, right? But anyway, I just have a problem with work-life balance. Like, since when was work and life different? So that's basically about it. But
I like very much you bringing up this sort of gender question, because I definitely feel very, very strongly that this is a conversation that everyone needs to have, and it is certainly true in our society. You know, women have very different pressures on them, but this is certainly a broader conversation. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. We do have a few more questions. Maybe, right behind you would be great.
Thanks. Heather Fernuke, a Series alumna, and working with this issue now at the Department of Transportation in the Asia-Pacific region. I like the emphasis on partnership that seems to be universal across couples. I am curious, particularly for those times when you've been the one that's had the longer hours. It's been wonderful that you've had a spouse that's been able to step in and compensate, but what are ways when you've been on the longer hour side that you've been able to creatively stay connected to your family? Because it seems like you all have really strong families, and I'd love to hear some of those tips.
Great.
I'll start quickly and say, again, first of all, leadership matters. I was at the Department of Defense, which sounds, I know, but first of all, it was great. But second of all, my leadership was fabulous because my Undersecretary of Policy was Michelle Flournoy. And she worked very long, hard hours, but she has 3 kids herself. And so what's called in the Pentagon the command climate was one of, yes, you have to work hard, but if someone has to go home because their kid is sick, no one's going to criticize them for that. And so I think leadership really matters, and I think that's where it gets back to messaging your work environment and making sure your work environment knows that they have a duty and an obligation to create an environment where people can find that balance and not separate work and life. Makes a big difference. My tricks, again, I don't know that my tricks work for everyone else because I was lucky that this opportunity came at a time when my kids were older. And as I said, Joey got to be, when I went to the Pentagon, he was 14 or 15, and he didn't want to talk to me anyway because he was a teenage boy. So it was fine that I was never home. But I would try on the weekend make all the time I could to go to as many of the soccer games and baseball games. I stayed a Girl Scout leader. I went camping with the Girl Scouts even when I was, so at least spending time on the weekend and at least trying to be home to see them in the evening, which I could because they were older. They weren't going to bed at 8 o'clock. It would have been harder. The truth is I might have not chosen to take that job earlier if it had been offered to me when my kids were younger, because that would have, I think, been too much of a sacrifice for my family.
I mean, Craig has a commute, to Baltimore, which takes a good chunk of time. So, are there things that you do to manage this question of?
I think I'm very lucky in that I get to set my schedule largely, and so I don't leave. I try not to leave in the morning until after our daughter is up, and we get to spend some time together, and then I'm generally home by dinner. So it's really rare when I'm not. So I feel like for me, carving out time for the family is important, and saying no to events that I would otherwise sometimes stay for, at this point doesn't seem worth it. And I think that'll be something that gets readdressed later on.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you become really kind of draconian about what you accept and what you don't expect. But I was remembering when, at one point, I guess I was commuting into New York for a Russell Sage thing, and so I would leave super early in the morning, but then that would allow me to come and sort of do the daycare pickup at night. So we often, at points in our careers, one person would sort of be with the kids in the morning, and one would be the evening daycare, pickup and whatever. And so that, again, this is sort of, lots of trading off, I guess, is the way we did it.
You work 12 hours, but I'll take the first shift and you take the second shift, right?
Yeah, and so you shift it around. Okay, great. There are some hands, some students maybe. Oh, Wade, you've done all this. Let's get the students in. You guys know everything. Sarah.
Thank you. Sarah Miller, I'm a PhD student. I don't have kids yet, but I am married, which is enough time consuming, I think, in a nice way. First question, do you think that it's getting easier with virtual commuting and technology? A lot of people now can work from home when maybe 10 years ago that wasn't an option, or job share type things. Do you think it's only getting easier for people with families, or is it bogus to think that you can really do a full-time job from home and take care of your family? And a second question, I know some friends who describe their model as sort of taking turns. And you guys have talked about negotiating with each other and making different choices, but never really having a period where one person is literally not at all doing something related to their career and the other person is pursuing their career. And this particular friend has a PhD. She's now been out of the job market for like 9 years or something. And I think, well, gosh, if I get my doctorate and then I'm out of the job market that long, how do you get back in? So I wonder what you think about that model.
Good. Okay. So the first one is about sort of our virtual lives. Does iPhones and Blackberries and whatever make things easier or harder? What do you guys think about that?
I think they are, and there will be, because the norm for a lot of companies is to provide telecommuting. In the government, there's some agencies have you must telecommute one day because it cuts down on pollution and traffic. On the other hand, I can't believe that there's a lot of value to being around the water cooler. But the wave of the future, I think there's going to be a lot more telecommuting, especially when you have telepresence, when you have somebody. And I've worked with virtual teams, have clients who live in a different state for years at a time, and I never kind of met them, So working remotely or virtually is be more and more the norm, I think.
Yeah, Yahoo notwithstanding. Right?
I would say that if it gives flexibility to families, then it's a positive. If it makes, if it never allows you to have private space in your home, if you're never not working, then it's probably bad for families. But again, I would still emphasize it's every individual. It'll work for some people, and it won't work for others. I'm sorry, Abe.
I think that's well said.
Yeah. And then this question about stepping away, this sort of monocultures, right, where one person is the worker and one person stays at home. I've observed in my life, I live in Chevy Chase, Maryland, where this is not unheard of, right? And I think it's very difficult to make that work in a couple. And study after study shows that, yes, it's very expensive to pay for daycare while both people are working, all that. But the wage loss from stepping away from the labor force for that period of time far dwarfs any of the expenses that you pay in the short run in making the two-career thing work. So, I do want to respect, people have really different choices on this, but I see far too many women who lean back, and I think, Sheryl Sandberg and her co-author are correct about that. I think that you have to be very, very careful with that. But that's a very personal view. I don't know, do other people want to?
I think it would be a disastrous choice for an aspiring academic. You've just invested 6-7 years of your life in a PhD, and then you kind of sideline yourself for 3 or 4 years. There's a good chance you'll never get back in the game, given the way that this profession works. So that's a bad choice as far as I see. You need to find another partner. But nice there for you. But I think, and that gets back to the issue. Whatever profession you're in, there are certain benchmarks and expectations that you have to meet. In our profession, it's finishing your dissertation, it's getting a job, it's getting tenure. And that does require, allocating time in ways that might put burdens on the family. And we've been lucky, we are in the same profession, so we can I can put myself in Celeste's shoes, she can put herself in mine, and so we know what we're going through at any given point in time and can create the space that's necessary to meet that hurdle. The issue then becomes, what do you do after? And that gets back, I think, to your point about, do you have these really rigid life goals that you have to meet in order to be happy, or is it more process-oriented? Going back to your motto, I think it might be the Rolling Stones, actually. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might get what you need.
I like that. That's good. That's very good. Excellent. Okay. Yeah.
I also want to say that one of the craziest parts about work-life balance is that you don't know how you're going to respond to parenting until you're a parent. And so often the work part of work-life balance is determined by your degrees. Like somebody's a lawyer, that's what they're going to do. Somebody's an academic, that's what they're going to do. You've made this choice prior to having a child, and then a child appears, and maybe it's the person that was the lawyer that's going to make a lot more money. They love being a parent, and the academic who's not making very much money really loves their job. And so I think you just have to be flexible enough to realize that until that child lands into your house, you really don't understand what that's going to be about, and that you as a couple are going to have to renegotiate who's taking time off or staying home, because some people just don't have the temperament to be a stay-at-home parent, and some people love it, and you just can't know that until that child is there.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, we're finishing in about 7 or so minutes, but definitely saw a few more hands. So do you have any other questions? Rafi, in the back?
I think this question's pretty self-explanatory, actually, but I'll put it out there anyways. All of you have the advantage of having at least one person in the relationship who's an academic. So, I mean, an easy answer to the problem of flexibility and schedule can pursue a career like that. But what I would like to ask is, for your contemporaries and your friends that do not have that career, have you seen it be more of a challenge for them than it's been for you? Or do you see pretty much everyone that has a healthy partnership figuring this out?
Great. That's a great question. Why don't we, it'd be great to sort of maybe go down the line of that. So, Tomas, why don't you start?
So, I disagree in the sense that there are couples who are both working, at high-powered positions and have a balance, and they can make it work. I don't think it's predetermined that it's not going to work when you have somebody who doesn't have a job, academic jobs will have built-in flexibility. Yeah, well, I was lucky I married into one, right? And I can see where the tension might occur, but you have daycare and hiring out and getting nannies or whatever kind of help balance some of those things, or shifting the schedules. So I don't think it's predetermined that it's doomed for failure without a flexible schedule. Nurses, doctors sometimes work, odd schedules, right? Or they work, or firemen and policemen work different kind of schedules, right? You can make those things work, and even if you are both 9-to-5 jobs, but I don't see 9-to-5 jobs anymore. So.
Yeah, just real quickly. I mean, people I know in our neighborhood who have demanding jobs where they have to be at the office for set periods of time, they end up in a sense following what Celeste's advice was, which is they rely on networks. I mean, their kids are probably in daycare after school, but there are friends picking them up, and there's reciprocity in terms of chauffeuring and ferrying on weekends to the soccer games and whatnot. But I also see that these parents, at least the ones that the many of them that I admire, the time after work becomes very intense. I mean, they're there for their kids. They are chauffeuring them to the trombone lesson. They're there on the weekends for the games. They offer to help out in terms of whether it's sports or Boy Scouts or what have you. And so you invest your time when you have it, and I think your kids understand that.
Yeah. And I would add to this picture. I'm sure there are parents, I know there are parents who find they can't make it work to have the full-time intense jobs, and so someone pulls back. That's what I mean. They make that choice in their life, and it's regrettable they do it, but they make that choice. And if they can pull back, one spouse can pull back enough so that later on they step up. And your question was right. It is interesting. This is a little slice of life that isn't that common. And I know a lot of people who work in think tanks just because I spent time in think tanks, I spent time in government, and I was thinking about it when I thought your question, and I think there's a natural rhythm too. When I think about my friends who are couples in more intense full-time jobs where they don't have the flexibility, one has taken a less prominent position and then has cycled. So I think, again, everyone needs to find the way that works for them, and that may mean taking turns on a given week, but it may mean taking turns in intensity of career over a year or two. And but I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna. I don't think it's that easy to do, and I still think that there are things that we can expect in a public policy sense to make it easier for families to do that, and that should be more of our focus.
Yeah. What do you guys think?
So I wanted to thank Georgetown for its parental leave policy. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say that I think, I was going to say the same thing, is that I think the biggest challenge for our friends, because a lot of our friends have under 3 children, is particularly in the federal government. Those people that have kind of high-powered jobs in the federal government, you just get FMLA, which is 12 weeks unpaid. And so most of the parents that we know, they have this 3-month-old, and if you've dealt with a 3-month-old, they can't do anything. They're just like a little lump. And you, after that 12 weeks, you have to somehow find somebody that's going to deal with your little lump. And that, I think, is really heart-wrenching. And so I think that I mean, if we could change that, I'd say even more than the kind of the way we can change our schedule and go to the afternoon pickup or whatever. My friends who are in that situation, it's easier to do you take the morning, I take the afternoon, 12, we both work 12 hours. But that first year is really difficult for people that are in aggressive jobs. And I don't think there's any elegant way except to change family leave.
Yeah. Okay. And the last question? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jacob Votter. I'm a second-year master's student in the School of Foreign Service. So my question is work-life balance for single people an oxymoron? Yeah. It seems like it's harder to justify courtship as a need for more time off from work. And are there strategies that we as young professionals going into our first big jobs can employ to make sure that we're not in the office 14 to 16 hours every day?
Yeah. That's a really great question. And in a way, I sort of apologize. We focused so much on sort of the family stuff, because so when I was in graduate school, I loved doing triathlons, and I loved, cooking and sewing and doing all these other things. And so I was doing graduate school, but I was doing all those other things as well, because that was just important to me to be a well-rounded person, and that I felt like I would shrivel up if I was just doing, the work stuff, right? And what I found was eventually, as I got married and had children, that that was actually really good for me, because I had already sort of practiced what it meant to have space for those other things that you really care about, that really kind of nourish your soul, right? And nourish who you are in a multidimensional way. And so I think it is really important, and it is really important to have bosses that get this. And I worked on the Hill, my first job after undergrad, and my boss used to just come and turn off the lights at 7 p.m. Everybody go home now, right? The congressman, he would just everybody leave. And I think we certainly try to sort of model that as now in our lives, but I think that's something that you really should fight for and be kind of stubborn and mulish about. I think it's really important. Other points on single folks and having
Can't remember
life?
those years.
Yeah.
I remember reading a lot of science fiction.
I think Celeste's point is the key point, which is that you're always making choices, and you have to just be okay with those choices.
Yeah.
So it's whether you're staying 14 hours. The difference is when you have children in your life or a partner, you're saying no to that child or to that partner, which makes the choice a little bit more complicated. When you're in the individual, you're making those choices with yourself, but it's still a choice that you're making, and you have to then be okay or not okay with it.
I got in trouble with my dissertation advisors when I went on this 2-week ski trip to Utah. Do you remember that? I had to just pretend I wasn't going, because for them it was like having a third child or whatever. They're like, I can't believe you were leaving to do it. Anyhow, Rafi's laughing. He's one of my PhD students. So he's like, now I know. All right. Well, thank you so much to the panel. Thank you to you guys for a wonderful audience, and very good luck on working out all these issues as you go forward. Thank you.